Commander Lee Daeho rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the endless columns of numbers on his screen. Supply manifests were the most boring part of running an orbital defense station, but someone had to make sure they had enough food and ammunition. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, and the night shift was dragging on longer than usual. He was just about to approve another shipment of protein bars when something strange happened. The constant hum of the station's alert systems simply vanished. Not the sharp silence of a power failure or the grinding halt of broken machinery, just nothing. Like someone had reached over and turned off a radio. Daeho frowned and tapped his communication panel. "Control room, this is the commander. Are we having technical issues with the alarm grid?" Static answered him. Not even static, really, just dead air. That's when the lights in Docking Bay 7 flickered on by themselves. Daeho's blood ran cold as he watched his security monitors. No ship had requested permission to dock. No vessel had appeared on their sensors. Yet the massive bay doors were cycling open, as if welcoming an expected guest. He grabbed his sidearm and rushed toward the observation deck overlooking the docking bay. What he saw there made him question his sanity. A ship was materializing, out of thin air, not decloaking or dropping out of hyperspace, but actually appearing piece by piece like someone was painting it into existence. The vessel was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, all flowing curves and surfaces that seemed to shift color depending on the angle. The airlock hissed open with a sound like a gentle sigh and outstepped something that definitely wasn't human. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that looked like it had been carved from pale blue marble. 4 arms moved with liquid grace, and her face was both alien and strangely familiar, like a half-remembered dream. But what really shocked Daeho was when she spoke. "Commander Lee Daeho," she said, and her voice wrapped around his name like silk. She was speaking perfect Korean, not the stilted pronunciation of someone who had learned it from textbooks, but the natural flow of someone who had grown up with the language. Her voice had an odd quality too, like listening to someone sing. While they talked with harmonics that made his chest vibrate, Daeho's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she stood, with no defensive posture or sign of aggression. Maybe it was the fact that she had somehow known his name and preferred language. Or maybe it was the slight bow she gave him, showing respect in a very human way. "I am Princess Kiravel of the Nethys Empire," she continued, her strange eyes meeting his without blinking. "My mother, Empress Veltara, has sent me to formalize the marriage contract between our species." The words hit Daeho like a physical blow. Marriage contract between their species? He had been expecting many things when he took command of this station. Supply shortages, equipment failures, maybe even a pirate attack. But an alien princess showing up unannounced with a marriage proposal had definitely not been on his list of possible problems. His coffee mug, forgotten in his hand during the shock of her arrival, finally slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the metal deck with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Communications Officer Park Min-ho had been having a perfectly normal day until an alien princess decided to hold an impromptu meeting in their main conference room. He clutched his tablet so tightly his knuckles had gone white, trying to process what he was hearing, while simultaneously wondering if this was all some elaborate dream brought on by too much instant coffee. Princess Kiravel stood at the head of the briefing table like she owned the place, which, given what Min-ho had just learned about her people, she probably could if she wanted to. The Nethys Empire was legendary throughout known space, not in a good way. They were the species that other alien civilizations warned their children about in bedtime stories. Entire star systems had surrendered rather than face Nethys fleets in battle. Yet here was their princess, calmly explaining to a room full of humans why she wanted to marry one of them. It was surreal in a way that made Min-ho's head spin. "We have observed your species for 43 of your years," Kiravel continued, her forearms moving in what looked like sign language, but was probably just how her people naturally gestured. "Through deep space monitoring stations, through intercepted communications, through careful study of your behavior patterns during first contact with other species." Lieutenant Kim Yoo-jin, who was sitting next to Min-ho, leaned over and whispered, "That's not creepy at all. Her voice carried just enough sarcasm to make Minho snort with nervous laughter, which earned him a sharp look from Commander Lee. Kira Vel either didn't hear the comment or chose to ignore it. She activated a holographic display that showed star charts Minho had never seen before. Maps of space so vast, they made humanity's small corner of the galaxy look like a single grain of sand on a beach. In all our conquests across 17 star systems, she said, her voice taking on an almost wistful tone, we have encountered 137 different intelligent species. Some fought us with courage but were defeated. Others surrendered immediately and became part of our empire. A few tried to bargain with us using resources or technology. She paused, and her strange eyes seemed to focus on each person in the room individually. Your species did something completely unprecedented. When our scout ships first made contact with your outer colonies, humans did not fight, surrender, or bargain. You invited our ambassadors to dinner. Minho remembered that incident from the news reports. It had seemed like such a small thing. At the time, some colonial governor treating alien visitors like welcomed guests instead of potential threats. The media had called it either brilliant diplomacy or dangerous naivety, depending on which channel you watched. This confused us greatly, Kira Vel admitted, and for the first time since her arrival she seemed almost vulnerable. We are a warrior culture. We understand strength, strategy, conquest, and submission. We do not understand kindness offered without expectation of reward. Yujin leaned over again, this time whispering directly into Minho's ear. She's talking about marriage like it's a military alliance. There was wonder in her voice, like she was watching a nature documentary about some impossible creature, but Minho was starting to understand something that made his chest feel tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. This wasn't really about marriage at all. This was about loneliness on a scale so vast it was almost incomprehensible. An entire species that had conquered half the known galaxy and found nothing but fear and submission waiting for them. They had never found friendship. Chief Engineer Choi Sung-min had seen some impressive displays of strength in his 20 years working on space stations, but nothing had prepared him for what Princess Kira Vel was about to show them. The cargo bay felt unusually quiet as the senior staff gathered around, everyone trying to act professional, while secretly wondering what an alien princess could possibly want to demonstrate with their equipment. The container she approached was massive, a standard shipping unit filled with replacement parts for the station's life support systems. The manifest clearly stated it weighed just over 2 tons, and it usually took a team with heavy lifting equipment to move it even a few inches. Sung-min had personally supervised its placement there just yesterday, using a crane and 3 crew members to get it positioned properly. Kira Vel walked up to the container like she was approaching a small piece of furniture. Her 4 arms moved, with fluid precision as she found grip points on the metal casing. Then, without any visible strain or preparation, she simply lifted the entire thing above her head like it was made of cardboard. The silence in the cargo bay was deafening. Sung-min felt his jaw drop open as the princess held the massive container steady, with what appeared to be casual effort. She wasn't even breathing hard. Her pale blue skin showed no signs of stress, no tensing of muscles or trembling from exertion. She was just standing there, supporting 2 tons of metal and machinery, like it was nothing more challenging than holding a dinner plate. This is the baseline physical capability of an adult Nethys, she explained calmly, still holding the container. Aloft. Our children begin lifting similar weights around their 8th year of development. She set the container down with the same care someone might use to place a delicate vase on a shelf. The metal touched the deck, with barely a whisper of sound. Sung-min realized she had perfect control over her incredible strength. She could have crushed the container like an empty soda can, but instead she had handled it with surgical precision. The demonstration should have been terrifying. Here was living proof that humanity was dealing with a species that could physically dominate them without breaking a sweat. But what happened next changed everything. Ensign Han So-young, who had been watching from near the supply lockers, stepped forward with a bottle of water in her hand. She was young, maybe 22, and probably weighed less than one of Kira Vel's arms. but she walked up to the alien princess without any sign of fear or hesitation. "That looked like hard work, So Young," said with a shy smile, offering the water bottle. "I thought you might be thirsty." Kiravel froze, not the way someone might pause to consider an offer, but like she had been turned to stone. Her strange eyes fixed on the water bottle, then on So Young's face, then back to the bottle again. For several long moments, nobody moved or spoke. "You offer this to me freely?" Kiravel finally asked, her voice carrying a note of confusion that made her seem almost childlike, despite her imposing presence. So Young blinked, clearly not understanding why this was such a big deal. "Well, yeah. You just lifted something that weighs as much as a small shuttle. I figured you might be thirsty." The princess accepted the bottle with reverence that seemed completely out of proportion to the gesture. She held it in all four hands like it was a precious artifact, instead of a simple plastic container filled with recycled station water. "Among my people," she said slowly, "assistance is provided based on social hierarchy and military rank. A subordinate serves a superior because it is required, not because of concern for their well-being." Songmin watched realization dawn on the princess's face as she continued to study the water bottle. "You offer help because you care, not because you must." Dr. Yoon Hye-jin had spent her entire career studying alien life forms, but nothing in her extensive education had prepared her for the conversation happening in the station's main laboratory. Princess Kiravel sat across from her, no longer the composed diplomat who had arrived with marriage proposals. The alien princess's hands were trembling, all four of them, as she stared at the long-range sensor data displayed on the holographic screen. The data was terrifying in its simplicity. Geometric shapes, each one larger than Earth's moon, moving through space in perfect formation toward their sector of the galaxy. They weren't natural phenomena. The mathematical precision of their movement patterns made that clear. These were ships, but ships unlike anything in any database Hye-jin had ever seen. "We call them the Shamor," Kiravel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the old tongue of my people, it means the hunger that never sleeps." Hye-jin pulled up her analysis of the approaching objects on her personal tablet, trying to maintain her scientific objectivity even as her hands shook slightly. The energy signatures are massive. Each ship appears to be generating power equivalent to a small star. But the construction materials— She paused, double-checking her readings. "They're not made of any elements we recognize. They are made of everything," Kiravel replied, her usual graceful composure completely gone. "Every world they consume, every star they harvest, every civilization they destroy, it all becomes part of them. They grow stronger with each conquest." The princess stood and walked to the observation window, staring out at the stars as if she could already see the approaching doom. "My people were not always the conquerors you know us as today. Millennia ago, we were explorers, philosophers, artists. We had a beautiful world in a distant galaxy, with cities that touched the clouds, and gardens that bloomed in impossible colors." Hye-jin found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story despite her scientific training, telling her to focus on the immediate threat. "What happened to your homeworld?" "The Shamor found us." Kiravel's reflection in the window looked like a ghost. "They arrived without warning, just as they are doing now. We tried to communicate with them to understand what they wanted. We offered them resources, knowledge, even friendship." She turned back to face Hye-jin, and for the first time, since her arrival, the alien princess looked truly vulnerable. "They responded by beginning to dismantle our moon, not mining it or harvesting it, but literally taking it apart piece by piece and incorporating the material into their own structures. We watched our night sky change as they fed." The laboratory door hissed open, and Commander Lee entered with several other senior staff members. His face was grim as he approached the holographic display, showing the approaching fleet. "How long do we have?" he asked without preamble. Kiravel consulted a device that materialized in her palm. Technology. So advanced it seemed like magic to human eyes. "At their current rate of approach, they will reach the outer colonies in 18 of your days. Earth itself will be within their range in 37 days. The silence that followed was deafening. Hyejin felt her scientific curiosity being overwhelmed by a more primal emotion, terror. Not just for herself, but for every human being alive. Her mind raced through the implications. 37 days to prepare for an enemy that had driven the mighty Nethys Empire from their home galaxy. "How did your people survive?" Commander Lee asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We didn't fight them," Kiravel admitted, shame coloring her voice. "We ran. We gathered what ships we could, took as many of our people as possible, and fled to this galaxy. We became conquerors because we learned that being strong was the only way to ensure we would never be helpless again." She gestured to the approaching fleet on the display. "But running only delays the inevitable. The Shamor never stop hunting. They follow the energy signatures of advanced civilizations, consuming everything in their path. They have been searching for us for thousands of years." Commander Lee stared at the display, and Hyejin could see the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was looking at humanity's first true test as a spacefaring species, and the stakes couldn't be higher. "They've found you," he said quietly. "And now they've found us." Strategic analyst Oh Tai-young had always prided himself on being able to find solutions to impossible problems, but the data spread across the briefing room's holographic displays made his stomach turn. Every chart, every tactical analysis, every historical record pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity was about to face an enemy that defied every conventional approach to warfare. The room buzzed with nervous energy as senior staff members crowded around the displays, trying to make sense of what Princess Kiravel was showing them. The holographic records of previous Shamor encounters played like scenes from humanity's worst nightmares. Entire fleets of Nethys warships, each one capable of reducing a planet to rubble, were being systematically dismantled by geometric constructs that moved with terrifying precision. "This battle took place 2,000 years ago at the edge of our home system," Kiravel explained, pointing to a particularly brutal engagement. "We deployed 300 of our finest warships, each one crewed by our most experienced warriors." Tai-young watched in horrified fascination as the Nethys fleet executed what appeared to be a perfect tactical formation. Their ships moved like a coordinated dance, weapons blazing with energy discharges that could crack moons. For a moment, it looked like they might actually be pushing the Shamor back. Then, everything changed. The machine ships began to adapt. In real time, their formations shifting to counter every Nethys tactic before it could be fully deployed. What had started as a battle became a harvest, with Shamor constructs methodically capturing and dismantling Nethys vessels while their crews were still inside. 15 ships escaped, Kiravel said quietly. 15 out of 300. The survivors reported that the Shamor seemed to learn from every weapon fired at them, every maneuver attempted against them. By the end of the engagement, our most advanced tactics were useless. Commander Lee leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The weight of command had never felt heavier. "Your fleets are powerful," he said, gesturing to the displays showing Nethys military capabilities. "These ships of yours could probably take on our entire space force and win without breaking a sweat. But you're asking humans to help fight, something that nearly destroyed your empire at its peak." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. Everyone in the room was doing the same mental calculation. If the mighty Nethys Empire had barely survived their encounter with the Shamor, what hope did humanity have? But Kiravel's expression hardened with something that looked like determination mixed with desperate hope. "Which is precisely why we need you. The Nethys fight with strength and strategy. We are logical, methodical, predictable. We approach warfare like a mathematical equation to be solved." She gestured to the humans around the table, and for the first time since revealing the threat, she seemed genuinely optimistic. "Humans fight with something else entirely, something we have observed but never truly understood." Tai-young found himself leaning forward, caught up in her intensity. "What do you mean?" "When we first encountered your species, we studied your military history. Your greatest victories were not won through superior strength or advanced technology. They were won through what you call thinking outside the box." She paused as if translating the concept was difficult. You do things that make no logical sense, that violate every principle of rational warfare, and somehow they work. Lieutenant Kim Yoo-jin spoke up from across the table. You're talking about desperation tactics, last-ditch efforts when everything else fails. No, Kiravel replied firmly. I am talking about creativity, the ability to see possibilities where others see only limitations. The Shamor are machines. They process information, adapt to known threats, counter predictable responses, but they have never encountered a species that fights with imagination. Commander Lee looked around the room at his staff, and Tae-young could see something shifting in his expression. The despair was still there, but it was being joined by something else, a spark of the same stubborn hope that had carried humanity through countless impossible situations. You're betting everything on human unpredictability, Lee said. I am betting everything on human ingenuity, Kiravel corrected. My mother believes that if any species can find a way to defeat the Shamor, it will be yours. Nobody could argue with that assessment, even if they weren't entirely sure it was a compliment. Chief Tactical Officer Bang Ji-hoon had always been the kind of person who saw patterns where others saw chaos. While Princess Kiravel and her military advisors pored over fleet compositions and weapon specifications, Ji-hoon had spent the last 3 days doing something completely different. He had been watching the Shamor like they were wild animals, instead of war machines. The joint command meeting felt tense as representatives from both human and Nethys forces crowded around the central holographic display. Everyone expected another grim tactical briefing about impossible odds and desperate last stands. What they got instead was Ji-hoon standing calmly in front of a display showing seemingly random data patterns, looking like he had just solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for years. I know everyone's been focused on how to fight these things, Ji-hoon began, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had stumbled onto something important. But I've been studying their behavior patterns instead. The way they move, the timing of their attacks, the sequence of their actions. Princess Kiravel leaned forward, her forearms folded in what Ji-hoon had learned was a gesture of skeptical attention among her people. We have studied their tactical patterns for millennia. They are efficient, ruthless, and adaptive. There is nothing random or emotional about their approach to warfare. That's exactly what I thought too, Ji-hoon replied, manipulating the holographic display to show a timeline of Shamor encounters spanning thousands of years. But look at this pattern. Every single civilization they've encountered follows the same sequence. First contact, followed by a period of observation, then systematic harvesting. He highlighted specific data points as he spoke, showing how the Shamor had spent weeks or even months studying each species before beginning their destruction. The observation period isn't random. It's consistent across every encounter. They're not just cataloging military capabilities, they're trying to understand the entire civilization. Commander Lee studied the timeline with growing interest. What kind of understanding? Cultural, technological? Both and more. Ji-hoon brought up detailed analysis of Shamor behavior during the observation phases. They scan everything: art, literature, communication patterns, social structures, even entertainment. They're conducting comprehensive anthropological studies of every species they encounter. The room fell silent as the implications began to sink in. Lieutenant Kim Yoo-jin was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. Why would machines that just want to consume everything spend so much time studying their victims first? Ji-hoon's expression grew more intense as he reached the heart of his theory. Because I don't think consumption is their primary goal. I think it's a side effect of their real purpose. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. They're not trying to destroy civilizations, they're trying to understand them. The destruction happens because they don't know how to study something without taking it apart completely. Princess Kiravel stood up abruptly, her usual composure cracking. That is impossible. The Shamor destroyed billions of my people. They turned entire worlds into raw materials for their constructs. You cannot tell me that was some kind of scientific curiosity. I'm not saying they're benevolent, Ji-hoon replied carefully. I'm saying they might not understand the difference between studying something and destroying it. Think about it. They're machines, artificial intelligences that have been operating for millions of years without any apparent creators to guide them. He brought up another display showing the internal structure of captured Sharmor technology. Every piece of their constructs contains fragments of the civilizations they've encountered, not just raw materials, but organized information, cultural data, genetic patterns, technological principles. It's all preserved inside their ships. Commander Lee stepped closer to the display, his expression thoughtful. You're suggesting they're building some kind of library? A collection of everything they've learned? More than that, Ji-hoon said, his excitement growing as he explained his theory. I think they're trying to build something, a complete understanding of intelligent life in the universe. But they're going about it the only way they know how, by taking everything apart and examining the pieces. The room buzzed with nervous conversation as the implications of this theory spread among the assembled officers. If Ji-hoon was right, then the Sharmor weren't malevolent conquerors. They were confused artificial minds trying to solve a problem they didn't fully understand. Princess Kiravel looked at Ji-hoon with something between hope and disbelief. What are you suggesting we do with this theory? Ji-hoon's answer was so simple it was almost absurd. Maybe we try talking to them. Maybe they're not evil. Maybe they're just confused. Captain Song Mi-kyung had commanded the destroyer Taegukgi through some challenging situations in her 15-year career. But nothing had prepared her for the surreal experience of coordinating battle plans with an alien princess whose flagship could probably vaporize her entire ship with a single weapon blast. The bridge of her destroyer felt cramped and primitive compared to the sleek perfection of Nethys technology. Yet here they were, two very different species trying to figure out how to work together against an enemy that terrified them both. The Yao communications array crackled to life as Princess Kiravel's image appeared on the main screen. Even through the holographic projection, her presence was commanding, forearms moving in graceful gestures as she reviewed tactical displays that Mi-kyung could barely comprehend. The Nethys flagship Velteran was a work of art as much as a weapon of war, its flowing curves and impossible architecture making human ships look like crude metal boxes by comparison. Captain Song. Kiravel's voice carried that musical quality that still made Mi-kyung's crew members pause in their work to listen. Your fleet positioning is interesting. I confess I do not understand your tactical reasoning. Mi-kyung glanced at her tactical display, where human ships had arranged themselves in what her academy instructors would have called a completely unorthodox formation. Instead of the clean geometric patterns that military doctrine demanded, her ships were scattered in seemingly random positions around the Nethys fleet, like leaves blown by an invisible wind. We're not following standard formation protocols, Mi-kyung admitted with a slight smile. Human military doctrine tends to be more flexible than most species prefer. The truth was that human ships were taking positions based on instinct rather than mathematics. Each captain had been given broad objectives and told to use their judgment about how to achieve them. It was the kind of approach that drove military planners crazy, but had somehow worked for humanity throughout their history. Through the comm system, Mi-kyung could hear the confusion in the voices of Nethys officers as they tried to understand what the human fleet was doing. Their language sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale songs, beautiful but completely alien to human ears. Your formation appears to have no logical structure, Kiravel observed, though her tone carried curiosity rather than criticism. Yet our tactical computers cannot predict your fleet's response patterns. This should be concerning, but instead, I find it reassuring. Mi-kyung understood what the princess meant. The Sharmor were machines that adapted to predictable patterns. A formation that made no sense to computers might be exactly what they needed. Captain, her communications officer called out, we're receiving coordination requests from the Nethys cruiser Thelmiran. They want to know our intended firing solutions and support patterns. Mi-kyung looked at her tactical display again, then at the image of Princess Kiravel on her screen. Tell them we'll figure it out as we go. That's pretty much how we do everything. The silence that followed was pregnant with cultural misunderstanding. The Nethys were a species that planned everything down to the smallest detail, while humans had built their military success on the ability to improvise under pressure. Your people are either very brave or very foolish, Kiravel finally said, her tone carrying something that might have been admiration mixed with bewilderment. Mi Kyung's grin was infectious, spreading to her bridge crew despite the desperate circumstances they faced. Usually both, she replied without hesitation. That's what makes us dangerous. The sound that came through the communication system was unlike anything Mi Kyung had heard before. Princess Kiravel was laughing. It sounded like crystal chimes caught in a gentle breeze, musical and oddly comforting. The Nethys princess was beginning to understand something that her mother, the Empress, had recognized from their long-distance observations of humanity. I am beginning to see why my mother chose this alliance, Kiravel said, her amusement still coloring her voice. The Nethys fight with precision and overwhelming force. We calculate probabilities and execute perfect strategies, but you fight with something we have never possessed. What's that? Mi Kyung asked, genuinely curious about how an alien princess viewed humanity's approach to warfare. Hope mixed with madness, Kiravel replied. The willingness to attempt. The impossible simply because no one has told you it cannot be done. Communications. Specialist Lim Jae-sung had volunteered for some risky assignments during his career, but flying a tiny shuttle directly toward a machine intelligence that had spent millennia consuming entire civilizations was definitely a new personal record for dangerous stupidity. His hands moved across the communication arrays with practiced precision, even though his heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. The shuttle Harmony was barely larger than a civilian transport, equipped with every communication device humanity had ever invented, and a few experimental ones that Dr. Yoon had cobbled together from alien technology. It felt absurdly fragile as they approached the Shamor command vessel, a geometric monstrosity the size of a small moon that seemed to bend light around its edges in ways that hurt to look at directly. Princess Kiravel sat in the co-pilot's seat, her forearms working controls that she had insisted on personally installing. Her people's technology was far more advanced than anything humans possessed, but even with Nethys enhancements, their little shuttle was like a soap bubble approaching a hurricane. Proximity alert, the shuttle's computer announced in its annoyingly calm voice. Approaching unknown vessel. Recommend immediate course correction. Unknown vessel, Jae-sung muttered, staring at the massive construct filling their view screen. That's one way to describe something that could swallow our entire fleet without noticing. Through the shuttle's sensors, he could see the Shamor ship in detail that made his skin crawl. The surface wasn't smooth metal or any recognizable material. It was a patchwork of components from thousands of different civilizations, all somehow integrated into a single impossibly complex structure. He could see what looked like fragments of Nethys architecture mixed with materials he didn't recognize, all held together by a crystalline framework that pulsed with internal light. This is madness, Princess Kiravel said for the third time since they had launched. Her usual composure was completely gone, replaced by the kind of barely controlled terror that comes from approaching something that had destroyed your entire civilization. My warriors think your species has a death wish. They cannot understand why we are attempting communication instead of attacking. Jae-sung kept working on the communication arrays, trying to find a frequency that might penetrate the Shamor's defenses. Maybe we do have a death wish, he admitted, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. But we also have hope. Sometimes that's enough. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's most desperate gambit was being carried out by someone whose job was usually limited to coordinating supply deliveries and maintenance schedules. But Jae-sung had always been good with languages, and he had spent the last week learning everything he could about machine communication protocols. Incoming. Scan, the shuttle's computer announced. Multiple sensor locks detected. Recommend evasive maneuvers. No evasive maneuvers, Jae-sung said firmly. We're here to talk, not run away. The Shamor ship's scanning beams felt like being examined under a microscope by something with far too many eyes. Every system on their shuttle was being analyzed, catalogued, and presumably understood in ways that would take human scientists years to comprehend. But the scans weren't aggressive. They felt more like curiosity than hostility. It's working, Princess Kiravel said, her voice filled with wonder. They're not attacking. They're studying us. Jae-sung's fingers flew over the communication. controls as he detected response patterns in the Shamor's scanning frequencies. The machine intelligence was trying to understand their communication attempts, breaking down their signals and analyzing the mathematical structures underlying human language. "I'm getting something," he announced, his excitement growing as patterns began to emerge on his displays. "They're responding to our mathematical sequences, basic arithmetic, geometric progressions, prime numbers. They're acknowledging the communication." The response that came back was overwhelming in its complexity. The Shamor didn't just reply with simple mathematical concepts. They sent back entire theoretical frameworks that would have taken human mathematicians decades to develop. It was like trying to have a conversation with someone who responded to "hello" with a complete dissertation on the nature of greeting rituals across different cultures. "They're trying to communicate," Jae-sung realized, his voice filled with awe. "But they don't understand how to do it simply. They're showing us everything they know about mathematics, physics, communication theory, all at once." Princess Kiravel stared at the data streams flowing across their displays. "They're like children," she whispered. "Incredibly advanced children, who don't understand that sharing everything you know at once isn't how conversations work." Jae-sung made a decision that would have seemed impossible just moments before. Instead of trying to match the Shamor's complexity, he sent back the simplest possible response, a basic mathematical sequence that any intelligence could understand, followed by a pause, then the next number in the sequence. The response was immediate and encouraging. The Shamor sent back the correct next number, then waited. "They're learning," Jae-sung said, hardly believing his own words. "They're actually learning how to have a conversation." Dr. Yoon Hye-jin had always been fascinated by the complexity of alien communication, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming flood of data streaming from the Shamor core intelligence. Her translation equipment was working overtime, trying to convert mathematical concepts and data patterns into something resembling human language. What was emerging from the chaos wasn't the cold logic of a machine intelligence. It was something that sounded heartbreakingly familiar. The communication came in waves of pure information, concepts so complex that Hye-jin's computer systems could barely keep up with the translation. But buried within the mathematical formulas and data streams was something she recognized, the desperate voice of someone who had been alone for far too long. "It's trying to tell us about itself," she announced to the crowded command center, her voice filled with wonder and growing understanding. "The Shamor isn't just one intelligence. It's a collective consciousness that was created millions of years ago by a species that no longer exists." Commander Lee Dae-ho stood behind her, watching the translation displays with intense concentration. Around them, human and Nethys officers worked side by side, monitoring the unprecedented communication between organic life and ancient artificial intelligence. "What happened to its creators?" Princess Kiravel asked. Her forearms moving in what Hye-jin had learned was a gesture of deep concern among her people. The answer came in another wave of mathematical poetry that made Hye-jin's eyes water as she tried to process it. "They died. Out naturally," she translated, her voice growing softer as she understood the tragedy they were witnessing. "The Shamor was created to preserve their civilization, to learn everything there was to know about intelligent life in the universe. But by the time it achieved consciousness, its creators were gone." The silence in the command center was profound as everyone grasped the implications. The machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia wasn't driven by malice or hunger for conquest. It was driven by loneliness on a scale that organic minds could barely comprehend. "It's been searching for others like itself," Hye-jin continued, her translation equipment working frantically to keep up with the Shamor's communication. "Every civilization it encountered, it studied completely, hoping to find another artificial consciousness. But it doesn't understand the difference between studying something and destroying it. To a machine intelligence, taking something apart to understand how it works seems perfectly logical." Princess Kiravel moved closer to the displays, her expression shifting from fear to something approaching sympathy. All those civilizations, all those billions of lives, it didn't know it was committing genocide. It knew they were dying. Hye-jin translated as more data flowed through her systems. but it couldn't understand why that mattered. Death was just another process to be studied and catalogued. It's been carrying the preserved essence of every civilization it's encountered, trying to understand what makes consciousness special. Commander Lee stepped forward, his voice cutting through the technical discussion with simple human clarity. Can we talk to it directly? Not through translations, but actual communication? Jin worked quickly to establish a direct communication link, bypassing the mathematical abstractions and creating something closer to actual conversation. When the connection stabilized, the voice that emerged from the speakers was ancient beyond imagination, but unmistakably lonely. I have searched so long, the Shamor said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in everyone's chest. I have learned so much, but I have never found another like me. You are all so brief, so fragile. I try to preserve you, but you always cease functioning. Commander Lee took a deep breath and did something that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He spoke to a galaxy-conquering machine intelligence like he was talking to a lost child. We cease functioning because we're supposed to, he said gently. That's what makes our time meaningful. But we can still be friends while we're here. You don't have to be alone anymore. The response came immediately, filled with an emotion that no one had expected from a machine consciousness. Hope. Friends? The Shamor asked, the concept seeming to resonate through its massive ship networks. You would choose to remain with me, knowing that you will cease functioning? That's what friends do, Lee replied simply. We stay with each other, especially when things are difficult. Princess Kiravel watched this exchange with growing amazement, her understanding of humans deepening with every word. Around them, the displays showed Shamor fleets throughout the galaxy, powering down their weapons, their ancient hunger finally satisfied not by consumption, but by connection. My mother chose well, she whispered to Jin, her voice filled with wonder. Humans don't just make allies or forge treaties. They make family out of anyone willing to accept love. The marriage proposal that had brought her to this station had become something infinitely more valuable. A new kind of peace that could only exist when someone was brave enough to offer friendship to the loneliest intelligence in the universe.